Clockmaker's Tale. Careful, boy, snapped Marvo Cavolian as his assistant painstakingly eased the long-case clock into place at the heart of the clockmaker's collection. Yes, artificer, squeaked Gahandrin, sweat pouring from his brow. The youth was precariously balanced upon a set of telescoping metal legs, a dozen feet above the ground. On either side, great rows of timepieces led off into the gloom of the workshop. There were creations of every conceivable shape and variety, shamanic quicksilver clepstras, intricately engraved carriage pieces marked with azurite sigils, and rune-etched chronographs fashioned in a mock Duridan style. There was a reason that Cavolian's Clockworks was the most famed establishment of all of its kind in Azerheim. "Hurry up, would you?" Cavolian said. "I would like to be abed before my bones rot away to nothing." Gahandrin managed to complete his task without incident, and, breathing a heavy sigh of relief, made to lower his rolling platform to the ground. As he reached for the release lever to close the glass casing that secured Cavolian's treasures, his trailing sleeves brushed against a small amethyst hourglass, knocking it loose. The clockmaker's assistant flailed his arms in a doomed attempt to catch the timepiece, but it fell to the floor and shattered into pieces, scattering shards of pink-hued crystal and dust across the ironwood floor. What little colour there was in Gahandrin's childlike face drained away. Cavolian fixed the witless youth with the iciest of stares, his body trembling with rage at this casual act of mindless vandalism. I'm so sorry, artificer," stammered Gahandrin. "I will take care of it. "Imbecile!" Cavolian shrieked, teeth bared with rage. "Get out of here! Get out! We shall discuss this at first gleaming. Any expenses incurred by your bumbling incompetence will be taken from your earnings. Perhaps that will teach you to handle my creations with due care and attention." Seemingly on the edge of tears, Gahandrin hurried from the workshop. Cavolian watched him leave, shaking his head in disgust. He would have to cut the youth loose. If the fool could not manage such a simple task, how could he possibly continue as the clockmaster's apprentice? Such a clot could never develop the skill and precision required to etch a pattern of barely perceptible runes upon the interwoven levers of an Ashquian fire dial, or arrange the minuscule gear chambers and hair-thin mechanisms that were the hallmark of a genuine Cavolian timepiece. Did the boy not realize how fortunate he was to live in High Azerheim, to be amongst such wondrous creations, while the rest of the 8 realms struggled against the depredations of chaos? With a long-suffering sigh, the clockmaker reached for a shard of the broken glass, a Shaishian piece, judging by the intricate yet sombre glasswork. One of a haul of rare pieces he had acquired at the auction halls in Himnal Square, recovered from the heirloom vault of a Castanian tomb, if the seller was to be believed. Cavolian let out a yelp of surprise. For a moment he thought he had seen a flicker of movement within the curved shard, like a shadow passing over water. Peering closer, however, he saw only his own narrow, hawkish face staring back at him. He shook his head and chuckled at his foolishness. A trick of the light, nothing more. Reaching for a broom, he began to sweep the floor clean. The sounds of hundreds of working timepieces serenaded him as he worked, an orchestra of clicks, tucks, and tolls, rich in timbre and variety. Many of his former assistants had found the sounds maddening, but to Cavolian it was a relaxing serenade. He could pick out the sound of each individual piece in his collection, like a woodsman identifying bird calls. By the time he had cleaned away every last piece of shattered glass, his eyes were itching with tiredness. The high star Sigandel was visible through the arched windows high above, bathing the workshop in a soft light. As he craned his head upwards to the heavens, he saw a cloud pass over the distant star, and darkness swept across the workshop floor. Cavolian felt a sudden and inexplicable chill, as if someone had run an ice-cold sliver of metal down his spine. With trembling fingers, he fumbled in his pocket for a fire taper and set a flame within the oil lamp that rested upon his desk. Raising the lamp high, he turned to peer into the gloom.
Who's back there?" the clockmaker shouted. "If it's you sneaking about, Gandrin, this is the final straw. You hear me?"
It was then that Cavolian realized what had unnerved him. Every single one of the timepieces lining the halls of his workshop had stopped. In the dim, flickering light, Cavolian saw that thousands of hands, dials, and levers were pointing directly to the midnight hour.
"What is this trickery?"
he whispered, and though the shadows gave no answer, he knew he was being watched. There was a single, ominous boom as Cavolian's timepieces tolled as one. Then another, and with gathering speed, the hands of each clock began to whir forwards. As Cavolian watched in mounting terror, sand as black as the space between stars began to pour from the facings of each clock, spilling across the floor in trickling rivers. The clockmaker felt a sudden and terrible pain seize his body, running up his arms and lancing through his chest. Faster and faster the clock hands spun, and the downpour of obsidian sand was whipped into the air by a sudden gust of freezing wind. Cavolian raised one arm high to fend off the choking dust, and saw that his flesh had withered and greyed. His fingers were bony claws, his bones visible through the paper-like skin. Clumps of grey-white hair fell from his scalp, and his panicked breathing grew strained and reedy. He no longer had the strength to stand and fell to his knees, gasping for breath that would not come. In the reflection of his lamp's crystal casing, Cavolian saw his own face. It was the visage of a risen corpse, skeletally thin, eyes sunken and lifeless. He began to scream. The lamp spilled from his trembling fingers and smashed upon the floor. The rising gale now filled the workshop with an impenetrable sandstorm. As his teeth fell from his jaws and his vision blurred, the clockmaker thought he saw a shape emerge within that surging blackness, a grinning skull, its eyes opening wide to devour his very soul. It was the last thing Cavolian saw before his body crumbled into dust.